Mario, did the White House see this coming today?
Yeah, it looks like the White House did see it coming. Joe Biden, just moments ago, said that he's very proud of his son in response to reporters' questions while he's out there on the West Coast for some fundraising bits as well. The statement that the White House released earlier today also played into some of that sympathy where Ian Sams, the White House spokesperson, said that President and First Lady Jill Biden are very proud of their son, right? The language is very, very precise. It's pulling on the heartstrings and making it a family issue as opposed to government or politic business.
Well, of course, at the same time that the White House and the Biden administration is trying to make this about Biden's family and standing by Hunter Biden, there are those political questions as to whether or not Biden had his thumb on the scale in any way at the Justice Department as it relates to his son, and just the fairness of all of this. At least those questions are coming from the Republican side, including from House Speaker Kevin McCarthy weighing in on these charges. This is what else he had to say this morning.
This does nothing to our investigation. It actually should enhance our investigation because the DOJ should not be able to withhold any information now, saying that because of pending investigation, they should be able to provide Chairman Comer with any information that he requires.
And on the subject of Congressman James Comer, who, of course, chairs the Oversight Committee, he also released a statement about how they're just going to keep investigating Hunter Biden and the Biden's family's dealings. So, Megan, is this just an excuse for Republicans in Congress to double down on those investigations?
Absolutely. You're going to see, and we saw in countless statements today from Comer, from McCarthy, from others, that they're planning to keep digging in on Hunter Biden and on any ties that the president may have had to any of Hunter's, business dealings that could have been illegal or unethical, involving an unnamed foreign entity. What we've seen so far, though, has been a lack of evidence in the Comer investigation, which was separate and different than the FBI, the DOJ investigation. But they're going to continue digging, and we'll see what happens. Also, what is happening, perhaps more publicly right now, is fundraising appeals. They wasted no time sending out emails, leaning on the two-tier justice system and asking for support from small donors, which we've seen increasingly. We saw it after the Trump arraignment a few days ago, and now we're seeing it now with the Hunter indictment.
Mario, you mentioned the response from the White House. I'm proud of my son. He said that again today at an event in California about artificial intelligence. Somebody shouted a question. I'm proud of my son. And it brings us back to an interview that he did with CBS News. It was on 60 Minutes. The president here with Scott Pelley last September. Listen.
I love my son, number one. He fought an addiction problem. He overcame it. He wrote about it. And no, there's not a single thing that I've observed at all that would affect me or the United States relative to my son, Hunter.
And, of course, with all of the questions about Hunter Biden's laptop and so forth, based on what we just heard from Megan, there will likely be a more concerted push to investigate this on Capitol Hill. Does that remain the response from the White House? You've got the legal story today, but the political one is not going to go away.
As of right now, that will remain the strategy of the White House. But as you alluded to, Joe, this is a bone that Republicans have been chewing on for the better part of 3 or 4 years. I was in the press conference with right before the debate when the Trump campaign brought out someone who had allegedly had inside information about this deal. They've been tearing at this for a while now. And what do you do if you're Republicans and your frontrunner has 30-some counts in one court, 30-some counts in another court as well, and your preferred cudgel is whataboutism? This is a gift for them in that instance.
Okay, well, let's talk about said frontrunner, of course, former President Donald Trump. The news, in addition to the charges and deal related to Hunter Biden, was that Judge Eileen Cannon down in Florida has set a trial date of August 14th. Incredibly speedy. Of course, we would imagine that Trump's defense may try to push that back a bit. But still, does that indicate, Mario, that this could be something wrapped up before the 2024 election?
It's doubtful because Donald Trump loves to prolong things. But on the other side of this, right, is we've seen poll increases for him. That August court date is about 9 days before the first Republican debate in Milwaukee, whether or not he takes the stage or not. What's interesting from a political perspective is if he does do a perp walk into the courtroom 9 days prior, does he try to turn that again into a walk into the debate stage as well and try to command that stage among the GOP? Because as of right now, it hasn't hurt his candidacy that much.
There are a lot of questions about Donald Trump speaking outside of court and making news in a way that his lawyers might not prefer. Let's listen to him in an interview with Fox News last night talking about the documents case, what was inside the boxes.
I had boxes. I want to go through the boxes and get all my personal things out. I don't want to hand that over to NARA yet. And I was very busy, as you've sort of seen.
Yeah, but according to the indictment, you then tell this aide to move to other locations after telling your lawyers to say you'd fully complied with the subpoena when you hadn't.
But before I send boxes over, I have to take all of my things out. These boxes were interspersed with all sorts of things.
Okay, so it seems to me he just admitted to not returning the documents when they were asked. Footage like that, Megyn, could end up as evidence in this trial. When's the investigation begin on Capitol Hill?
Into that, well, we wouldn't see it certainly from the House side, which is led by Republicans.
There's a lot of talk about double standards in Washington. It just might be worth asking.
Yes, well, as Mario mentioned, the whataboutism. Yes. And, you know, we've heard a lot about her emails and Hillary Clinton over the last few weeks, and now certainly the two-tier justice system that they talked about in terms of the charges against Hunter Biden and the charges against the former president. But I don't think you're going to see anybody, any daylight between House Republicans and President Trump.
Not that I'm surprised by your answer, but someone has to, Kailey.
Well, and there's also a question of what other action they may take, if not to investigate the former president who was indicted, but perhaps the man who indicted him, Special Counsel Jack Smith. There's been talk of defunding his efforts. Is that really something that can gain traction, those kind of potential retaliatory moves?
So we're going to see a couple things in the next few months. One is this push to defund the investigation. It would have to go through then the Senate as well, and the Senate is not going to agree to defund the DOJ investigation because the Senate is led by Democrats. So this could factor into sort of an end-of-year shutdown, end of fiscal year shutdown in September that then leads us to a government shutdown. So we have that happening. But then we also have some rumblings about impeachments of separately the DHS secretary, has been targeted for border security purposes. But then there's some kind of growing momentum to impeach, or at least move toward impeachment proceedings for the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, and or for the FBI Director, Christopher Wray.